Welcome to the Think on These Things podcast. Man, we're so glad that you're back. We're looking forward to a great podcast with you today.
Yes.
Honey, what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about a great topic on Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day.
We're going to be talking about healthy relationship patterns.
Oh.
And this is a great one because not only will it help you in your relationship with your spouse,
Yeah.
but your kids, and then that bleeds over into leadership, the ministries that you're leading, the people that you're working with in your church. If you're a pastor, minister, leader, whatever the case may be, these are things that are effective across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I think that one of the things that we need to consider when talking about these relationship patterns is we're going to try to examine how we fulfill those relationships and how others fulfill relationships with us. Because a lot of times we'll want to look at what other people are doing and we won't want to think about what it is that we're doing. So we have to be careful with that and just be mindful of it. And so that's what we'll try to tackle a little bit of today.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the mode of thinking there would be when you're tempted to think about what other people are doing, flip the script and think about what you're doing first, because you know yourself the best.
Yeah.
And so you'll be able to navigate through that first, which we could talk about that a little bit more as we jump into it.
Yeah. Why don't you jump into it? Because I feel like we always do this and we start talking and then I need you to talk and then I'll think about things.
Yeah. Well,
while I drink my coffee.
Well, the first thing, this will be your wheelhouse because I've heard you talk about this a lot with mastermind leadership.
Shout out to mastermind leadership.
Yeah, doing great things.
Yes,
so good.
We're trying.
Yeah, so good. But is communication.
Yeah.
And
oh boy,
a lot of people think they're good communicators.
Oh.
And they're really not.
Yeah.
They're not communicating. The biggest thing is they're not communicating expectations.
Right.
And this is marriage.
Yeah.
Kids.
Yep.
Leaders. And so then what happens is when those expectations are not met, then we react based on expectations that we never communicated to the other person.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, we can't expect people to live up to our expectations if they don't know what those expectations are.
Yes.
And I've seen many leaders do this.
Yes.
I learn by watching.
Yes, that's true.
And so if I see someone do it, then I can not necessarily figure out how to do it in the context of this. If you see someone act and behave in a certain way, then that kind of tells you what their expectations are. Because a lot of times, if they're not communicating expectations, they expect you to behave the way that they behave. Right. Or act upon things the way that they act upon things. So what you do is I learn by watching. So it's not a problem for me. Because I can kind of pick up on those subtle cues of how they interact with people, what they do. And this is from experience, seeing how people, I have that, I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't say analytical, but I watch things.
Yeah. And you pick up on patterns of behavior. You're
I'm a patterns person.
I think where you're a musician, maybe this is what makes you such a great musician but you pick up on patterns and you see like repeating patterns of behavior. And so I think that's kind of how you learn and pick up on behaviors of others.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you learn that way, then you can pick up on expectations easily. The problem is if you don't learn that way, then you can't, because a lot of times, or sometimes I shouldn't say a lot of times, but sometimes people will behave in a way that they expect you to behave. This the caveat to that is if you don't learn by watching, you're going to miss those cues for expectations.
Yes.
And this has been my biggest pet peeve as a leader, is that we can never expect someone to live up to expectations that are not communicated. We have to communicate expectations of behavior, expectations of boundaries, expectations of results.
Yeah.
And this goes through everything, right? Imagine if I'm mad. I'll just use an example because we just had Dr. Johnny King and Reverend Judy King with us this past weekend.
Yes.
And we love them to death, and they did incredible. But I'll just use his analogy. He talked about toothpaste because we had them do our marriage banquet.
Yes.
And if you don't put the cap back on the toothpaste, then, everything's going to fall apart in your marriage. But the catch is that if I don't communicate to my wife that I expect her to put the cap back on the toothpaste, which sounds comical, but it just gives us, a view of it. But if I don't communicate that, then how can I expect her to live up to that? And I think that's the thing is we have to communicate what we expect out of others.
Yes. And let me say this for parents. That's why communicated expectations, even when our children are young, are so important. We have young children, and we're not perfect parents by any means, but we try to communicate expectations and not react on things based on our emotions, because otherwise our children don't know what to expect. If one day we're okay with them doing something.
Doggone, that's such a good point across the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Keep on talking about that because I want to riff off that in a second.
So like one day we're okay with them doing something, and then the next day, because we're tired or we're in a bad mood, then we're not okay with them doing that. And so we go off on them. Okay, well, see, that is confusing for them because that's not clearly communicating expectation that this behavior is not okay under any circumstance. Does that make sense?
Yes, because while you were talking, here's what I was thinking. Take that and apply it to leadership, or take that and apply it to marriage.
Yes.
When there is no consistency in reaction or consistency in expectation, then those expectations cannot be met either. Yeah. And that's the thing is that, sometimes we want to base things on how we feel, and how we feel in that moment is probably not how that the true version of yourself is going to live the rest of their lives. Yeah. Right. And I think that, like you were talking about, communicating with your children, not out of emotion, right, but out of, I think we all approach. I'm trying to slow down because I felt like I was going too fast for a minute because I got really excited about this subject.
I think you're fine.
I think that, sometimes we approach relationships and we have to approach them with that base level of communicating expectation.
Agreed.
That's where we should start, I feel.
Agreed.
Because if we don't, then there's always going to be someone in that relationship that feels unfulfilled.
Yeah. Well, and on the flip side of that,
I just went from like 2.5 speed to 0.5 speed.
It was great. No, it's great. No, it's perfect. On the flip side of that is, so when you're in a situation and you realize, okay, this person, whether it be your spouse or a leader or coworker, this is really applicable to all kinds of situations. And you realize they're expecting something and you don't know what it is. Yeah. So ask a clarifying question.
There you go.
Open the door for communication.
Communication breeds clarity.
Yeah. Because I use this all the time in counseling. I'm like, well, what are you hoping for the outcome to be out of this? Yeah. And asking people.
How often do you hear, well, I don't know?
Yeah. Yes. Well, what's the most surprising answer is that, like, my clients will often surprise themselves with the answer of what they hope the outcome is going to be, because they realize that what they hope the outcome is going to be doesn't match their actions at the moment. Ooh. Yeah. So that's a whole deal. That happens a lot more than you realize. That's awesome. And it's like, well, if this is what you expect the outcome to be, you hope the outcome to be, then these actions are not going to take you there. So how do we get to this? How do we shift? So that's a great point for this. You ask, okay, well, what are you hoping to achieve by this? Yeah. What are your expectations of this? What is the outcome you're hoping for? Like, that's a great question to ask, even with your spouse. Like, what are your expectations? Even around the holidays, sometimes, today's Valentine's Day, and sometimes spouses have different expectations of the holiday. And so, like, you're not a mind reader. And so asking, like, what do you want to do for Valentine's Day? Or what are your expectations out of Valentine's Day? Like, that's a great question to ask. Yeah. I wouldn't be offended if my husband asked me that. He knows I'm not much of a holiday person. So he probably has more expectations. We might need to talk about that.
I love gifts.
Yeah. So, but asking that is a great question. If you feel like, okay, this is setting me up for disaster here, ask a leader, like, what are you looking for us to achieve by doing this? That's great.
And I think too, like when you approach your marital relationship, or romantic relationships, let's use marriage, for instance. If there's things that are unfulfilled within the home, as far as like maybe duties or, roles within the home, communicating about those, asking those clarifying questions like my wife just talked about. Hey, this is what I ask my wife a lot. What do you need me to do?
Yeah. Because it can vary.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I got to be real honest with you. I'm good at picking up on cues in a lot of places. At home is not one of them. And so I just have to ask, what can I do? Is it getting one of our daughters dressed? Is it taking out the trash? Is it what is it? What is it right now that you need me to do?
And sometimes that's so sad because it's like a really long list of things.
I know, she learned really quick. Don't overwhelm me. Just give me one or two at a time.
I'm like, oh, can you do this, and this, and he's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, oh, well, these are the top two. So.
Literally, she's had to do that before because too, but in that moment, like in the morning, sometimes. Everybody in church knows this. You'll have a late night on a night before or whatever. And so the next morning you get up a little late. Everybody's dragging, trying to get out the door. So things kind of pile up kind of quickly as far as tasks you have to complete to get out the door. Well, in that moment, I'm just like, zipping up my coat, over here, taking my time.
And I'm trying to get three women
girls and a dog.
Yes.
Ready. And I'm all like, I'm just feeling good. I'm a man. I don't have to worry about fixing my hair. And I walk out and she's through the roof trying to trying to get the AC's turned down to 62 to keep herself from sweating.
Like, why is it so cold in here?
and in that moment I have to say, hey, what do you need me to do?
Yes.
And it works.
It's so helpful.
I hope it works. It seems to be working. I mean, if it's not, I'm very fooled.
You know what? And I have to say,
that was your opportunity to say, no, it is working.
It is working.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I was jumping to the next thought.
Okay.
And actually that principle that he just said is really great, even with our kids, especially if you have older kids.
Yeah.
Because younger kids may not be able to communicate this, but if you have kids that are older, even like 7, 8, 9, even asking them, if they're very distressed or they're feeling overwhelmed, even asking them like, what can mommy do to help you?
What can mommy do to help you?
What can daddy do to help? And then as they get older, as they're teenagers, and their hearts are broken or they're going through different things, ask them, be like, what can I do to help you right now?
Most often, if it's a teenager, they're going to be like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
That's what you can do to help.
Yeah. And sometimes you might be surprised by the answer though. A lot of times what they're looking for is not advice. They just want you to listen, or they just want you to be there. Or maybe they just want to go do something with you. And that's a great way to open up lines of communication.
Yeah.
And that's a great way with your spouse too, because sometimes what we think they need is not
what they need.
Not what they need.
That's a really good point. We went through a time, and I think we've talked about it on the podcast before, when we had a miscarriage.
Yeah.
Then we had Vivian. And the first miscarriage wasn't as hard, I don't feel like.
No, because it was earlier.
Super early. And I don't, for the woman, it's different, right? For the man and the woman in those situations, it's very, very different.
Yeah.
For me, on the second miscarriage, we had our daughter Vivian. It was knowing what the life was going to be because I had never experienced having a child.
Yeah.
So in that miscarriage, I was like, man, this was going to be a life, right?
That's right.
And I said all that to say this: we come out of that, or we start that process of healing and mourning and all of that comes with a 13-week. Was it 13?
Yeah.
13-week miscarriage.
Weeks.
So, pretty deep. And in those moments, my wife is suffering far more than me. Hormonally, there's major shifts.
Yeah.
Physically, there's still an embryo, or at that point, I don't know what would have been considered. I guess it would be an embryo.
Yeah.
Inside of her that would have to come out and later be buried.
Yeah.
There is the mourning aspect of that.
Yeah.
And so she's feeling so much of what I didn't feel.
Yeah.
And there is nothing, literally zero, that I could do for her.
Yeah.
Except be there.
Yeah.
And sometimes we want to fix things.
Yeah.
There's some things you just can't fix.
Right.
But I think it was Rick Warren.
Yeah.
His son died. His son committed suicide. And he said something I'll never forget. His friends came to him, and one of his friends must have been a very wise person and said, I can do nothing for you, but I'm going to be here.
Yeah. That's right.
And Rick Warren called it the power of presence.
That's right.
Just
That's
be
good.
there.
That's right.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's really good. I think that kind of segues into kind of our next point about healthy relationship patterns is so communication, over communication.
Yeah, over communicate expectations for sure.
Is great. And the other part of that is consistency. That's consistency. And we talked about it a little bit, but being consistent in your communication.
Yeah.
Being consistent in your reactions and actions.
Yes.
Is extremely helpful to the people that you're in relationships with, because when we are a wild card and people never know what to expect from us,
never know what they're going to get with you.
They literally walk on eggshells.
Yeah.
That's why, my husband's a pastor. So I feel like I can say this, like, he's very consistent in his actions.
Gosh, I hope so.
He doesn't get up from the pulpit and preach based off of if he's having a good day or a bad day.
Even though the human tendency is to want to do that.
Yes. So it's not, if he's having a bad day, he doesn't get up there and chew the congregation out, you guys.
Chew the cud, as they say in the country.
That's not a good relationship pattern to fall into.
Yeah.
And it goes the same for marriage. And that's the same with parenting. If we're having a bad day, we chew our spouse out, or we fuss at our kids, and it's hard not to do that. But developing consistency, even if it's clarifying through communication by saying, sweetie, I'm feeling a little on edge today because I think it's because I'm just tired.
Yeah.
And just communicating that and just being consistent in our response and, letting them know I'm going to respond in the usual way. As just, I'm struggling a little bit because I'm tired and I don't feel the best today.
Yeah.
That is so helpful, because if you're a leader and people never know if you're going to go off on them, if you're going to ignore them or like withdraw from them, or like if all of a sudden you're just going to love them, like that scares people to death. Like they will be frightened of you because they won't know what to expect. They won't want to follow you.
Well, that, and chances are they'll want to withdraw from the relationship themselves if there is not consistency. As a protective measure, they'll seek to remove that. You know what I'm saying? Because what we'll do in that moment, I think, here's personally what I think, is that if the person is inconsistent, to control, because the only way to control an inconsistent person is to withdraw from them, right? Yeah. Because you cannot control that situation, or else you're going to ride the wave of emotion with them.
Yeah.
I believe that the answer to inconsistency is consistency.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Ding, ding, ding.
Like if you have a person that's being inconsistent, no matter what they're doing, be you. Be consistent in who you are and in being a good person. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to do away with Paul's writing, I become all things to all men that I might by any means save some, or I might by all means save some. We're not doing away with that. I mean that don't ride the wave of emotion that comes along with people being inconsistent. You be consistent.
Yes.
And if you have an inconsistent person in your life, approach that inconsistency with consistency.
Yeah, because you know what? It can really segue into being a manipulative, like unhealthy relationship then,
Yeah.
because say you're a leader and the people that are following you are at the mercy of whatever
they're beholden to
whatever
your
they're at the
emotions.
mercy of whatever mood you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're in a bad mood, then they scramble around and try to do anything they can to make you happy.
Yep.
Then the person starts responding to those results. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, if I know that when I get mad and snappy, everybody's going to hop to and get stuff done there. You guys, that's not the kind of, first of all, that's a toxic environment.
Yes, that's not what God wants.
We don't want to create that in our marriages.
No.
We don't want to create that with our children and parenting.
No.
And we don't want to create that in our churches and work environments. And we don't want to create that kind of an atmosphere.
Right.
So what he's saying is, if you're following someone that's like that, or if you're in a relationship, you keep the same consistent response. It's a temptation that when someone's getting snappy with us, that we start like jumping, we start getting nervous. At least it is for me. I know it is for me.
If they're snappy, I want to snap back.
Yeah, I just start getting like nervous. Like I just want them to stop. Or I want to go above and beyond to try to please people.
Which is a reaction, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it's not.
To that inconsistency.
So like, remaining calm. And what I tell people is like not responding to the emotions that you feel in the room, because they may or may not be directed at you.
Yeah.
And so giving in to those emotions.
Yes.
Is not healthy. Go ahead.
Right. And two, the other thing of that is that you're talking about we're responding to the person's inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Chances are, now this is not always the case. There could be a chemical imbalance for sure. But chances are is that those inconsistencies that we see are power grabs.
Yeah.
They're power grabs to control a situation, because they know if I do this, it's an if then deal. If I do this, this is what's going to happen. And this is especially true of long-term relationships, because if they're inconsistent and they act a certain way, they know it's going to elicit a specific response from specific individuals. And then what that becomes, that's manipulation.
Yeah.
Because so manipulation and leadership are both derived. We've talked about this on the Biblos Network plenty of times. Both derive from the same place. They're both pushing buttons, except for manipulation is for personal gain.
So good.
And leadership, you push people's buttons to help them expand themselves and rise above.
Yes.
Well, if there's inconsistencies in who they are and how they're acting and what they're doing, and you're manipulated by that becomes pushing buttons for manipulation, and it's not leadership. And there is a difference.
Oh my gosh, that's so good.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Brother Urshan gave me that, so I can't take full credit.
Well, it's so good.
An old rabbi told me that.
An old rabbi told you. Yes. But that's so good, and that's so true. And so.
Oh, can I say this too?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. You got me going now.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. Sometimes too, we'll grow up in that. We'll see that.
Sure.
And if we're not careful, if we don't have a good view of our own leadership or our own relationships, we become that.
Yeah.
Because we see that behavior modeled.
Yeah.
And then we tend to repeat that inconsistent manipulative behavior, because we've seen in the past it works because it worked on us.
Yeah.
So that can be true of leadership and relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I guess the big kind of question that comes out of this is, and we can talk about this, is how do we develop the introspection to know when we're being that way, and to kind of monitor ourselves against being that way?
There's a couple of things that came to my mind as we've been talking this entire time. One is feedback.
Yeah. That's good.
Feedback from loving people.
Yeah.
You know, some of the most introspective moments in my life have come at the hands of a mentor or my wife.
Yeah.
And here's why, because these people love you. And if like a mentor, there's one mentor in my life in particular that I know has no selfish thoughts or ideas, and he's not going to push his ideas upon me.
Yeah.
He just wants to help.
Yeah.
So when I receive that, I know that if they're telling me that, it doesn't have a slant. It's not slighted a certain way. And my spouse, now here's the caveat. Not all spouses are that great.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I'm just saying, like,
that's our relationship though.
Yes. Mine and my wife's relationship is such that she can speak into my life.
And the same for you.
Well, thank you.
Because my husband
So what kind of manipulation do I have to do to get a really good Valentine's Day?
We better talk about this after the podcast.
Okay. Not on air.
But my husband has been
Your partner.
My partner, but he's also been my mentor in a lot of ways. There's things that he has mentored me on. And then also we have created a feedback culture in our marriage.
Feedback loops, yeah.
Which is difficult sometimes because it's stuff that we don't want to hear. But we also realize that we love each other enough to tell each other the truth.
Yeah.
And to be like, hey, I'm concerned about this. Tell me about your thought pattern behind this.
Yeah. So, and in those situations, it requires that basic understanding of love.
Yeah.
Right. Because if I didn't know you love me as much as you do,
yeah.
I will tell you, there is no, other than Jesus, there is no person in this world that loves me more than my wife. And I know that.
Yeah, that's right.
And if I didn't know that, then it might be hard to receive some of the things she says. But I know she loves me. And anything she's telling me is out of love.
Well, it's so funny talking about feedback. Last night, Vivian was telling me I thought she was telling me good news.
Vivian's our oldest daughter.
Yes. I think I misunderstood her. I thought she was telling me about some good news and so I was like, oh, that's great. And she goes, that's great. Mommy, I got a boo-boo because I smashed my face in the door. She's like, that's great. I was like, I'm sorry, honey. I was like, Mommy misunderstood what you were saying. That's actually not great. That's actually really sad. And she was like, Mommy. I mean, she's 4. Okay. She's 4. And she was like, did you misunderstand?
She already understands inappropriate responses.
Yeah, really. Yes. And she's 4. But she was like, did you misunderstand? I was like, yeah. She's like, you just didn't know what I was saying. I was like, that's right. I was like, actually, Mommy wasn't listening that great. So I'm sorry. But my point.
That's awesome.
It was awful. She was like, that's not great.
It's not great. I broke my nose, Mom.
I'm so sorry. But anyway, even creating, so we talk about feedback with your spouse.
Yeah.
Feedback with your kids. When I was growing up, and this is my generation, my parents' generation, their generation, it's kind of like kids are to be seen and not heard. And my mom and I've talked about this multiple times. However you were feeling when you were a kid, it was stupid.
Didn't matter.
Mom was like, it didn't matter what I felt. It was just dumb. You're a kid. Who cares? And times have changed so much. And even creating a feedback culture with your children is a great thing because you get an insight into your own behavior. And what your kids are feeling is not always the reality of the situation.
That's good.
But it's their perception. It's how they're feeling. It's how you're making them feel. And then when you create that feedback culture.
That's so good.
Teenagers are classic. They feel like parents are on them all the time.
Yep.
And so, talking with your child about that and being like, I'm not trying to be on you. I think you're smart. I think you're very intelligent. As your mom, I just worry a lot about this, and that opens the door. And see, that carries into leadership, which is kind of, one of the categories we're talking about today, because as leaders, creating that open door for communication with the people that you're leading of how they feel about how an action was perceived.
Yeah.
You may not have meant it maliciously. You may not have meant to come down hard on them, but creating that feedback culture where they can say, I just felt like you were, really being hard on me. And I just, I got my feelings hurt.
Yep.
And that opens that door for you to get a little introspection for how you're coming across to other people.
Yeah. Because the fact of the matter is, for many people, perception is reality.
Exactly.
Perception is reality. And so when we do something, we don't know how it is perceived. And in that person's perception of what you've done or what you've said, that becomes their reality, and they begin to assign intent behind actions, right?
Yes.
And so the only way to make realities align is to communicate. That is the only way to align realities, because we can't allow perception to be reality, because perception is not always correct. And so communication aligns realities to the point that we're able to understand the intent of one another.
I'll be honest with you.
That's the smartest I've ever sounded on this podcast.
I'll be honest with you. As leaders,
I wish I could drop the mic.
Please don't. As leaders, we have to pursue a feedback culture.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest with you, and I know I just said that already, but this is just, I feel so strongly about this, that lower level thinking is thinking that there's just one perception of the situation.
Or one way.
One way
of being.
Of perceiving the situation.
Yep.
A lot of people, and I'm sad to say this, a lot of people do not even for one moment consider the other perspective or multiple perspectives in a situation. Because what happens is when we become upset or we become, emotionally entangled in a situation, we talked about this before on the podcast, catastrophic thinking.
Yeah.
We become flooded with emotions. Flooded. And we're just like, they're out to get me. They're this, they're that. This happened. This is the reality of the situation. And we don't for one moment stop and think, okay, what's 3 or 4 alternative explanations to why this could have happened?
Yeah.
And so I feel like, this is just my opinion, as leaders, we need to pursue that kind of thinking. Like, what are some alternate explanations for what just happened here? Let me jump in and get some feedback. There's been situations that have happened, interpersonally for me as a leader. Yeah. And I've just reached out to other people and been like, hey, what did you think happened here? And got their perception. And sometimes it wasn't the most flattering for me. And I realized, well, I need to change my approach a little bit. Yeah. And, I want to say this too, because we're going to finish up in just a moment, but feedback culture is the best way to be, right? It is. And we've talked a lot about leadership, but this is about relationships too. I want to use the leadership application. Well, leadership is relationship. Ooh, there's a quote. That's Instagrammable. You're right though. Here's my deal. Here's the way I approach the leaders in our church, right? I'm the pastor. I'm the guy that everybody sees, and I'm the one that's called to lead leaders and all others. And here's what I tell the leaders that are closest to me. I want you to become the best possible version of yourself you can possibly be, and be successful in everything God is calling you to do. Number 1, how can I help you do that? Yeah. And number 2, how would you like me to lead you? What is going to lead to the best response? Is it hands-on? Good. Is it hands-off? That's good. Is it micromanage? Is it come alongside? Tell me. And if you reach a point where it's like, okay, Pastor Grizzle's trying this and I don't really like it, it's not really working for me, they have the ability, the door is open for them to tell me that. Because here's why. My way of being, my way of doing is not right for all people. Right. It's right for me. Whenever we expect people to be like us, we literally dismantle all of Paul's writings on the body being fitly framed together. Yes.
And I
That's so
believe
true.
that what we have to do is we have to be willing to take feedback. I'm not afraid of feedback. Listen, when you've played music as much as I have and been around as long as I have,
You've played music with Kurt, can I?
it's like the pinnacle, right?
Well,
different ones. Like Andy Ferguson, he was my mentor, still is one of my mentors. But like the dude, I mean, back in the day, he would just say, "Dude, what are you doing?"
What was it Kurt told that one guy? He's like, "You're gonna play on beat or you're gonna go home." Let's tag him in this. Let's tag Kurt and I in this.
But here's the catch, though, is that to better yourself, to be a better person, better leader, musician, singer, preacher, usher, toilet bowl cleaner, everything in between, you've got to be open to feedback. So go ahead.
And I'll say this and then let you close it out. You know, as spouses, as parents, as leaders, we aren't doing anyone any favors when we allow them to continue to keep doing something that they're not doing well at. Oh. Like, I know you just mentioned music. That's a prime example.
It is.
Like letting people sing that can't sing or letting people play that can't play.
Yeah.
Like, and that goes on to like multiple things, you know, letting people teach that can't teach. And it's more than just their learning. That's a whole different thing. That's not their gifting. Like they're about like ready to pass out when they get in front of people to teach, like, and there's other areas in which they're gifted. Like that feedback culture is so important. Letting people do stuff just to make them happy or letting people do stuff just to do stuff. That's not a good enough reason. We want people to find their gifts and their callings and their talents, what God has called them to do.
Oh my goodness.
Not just get up there and preach just because you think that's the glamorous thing to do or that's the thing I need to be doing. Like if you've been preaching for, 100 years and like people are just in agony every time you preach, like find what you're good at and let's do that.
Don't be afraid to tell people.
Don't torture people.
Like tell the preacher, hey dude, we need to find another avenue for you to minister.
Yeah.
There's this, I want to share this, then I'm done. There was a statistic that said in like the 1950s and 60s, around 40 to 50% of high school graduates thought themselves to be important, right? Self-importance.
Oh boy.
Today, it's well above 90%.
Oh my God.
Believe they're important.
Oh, self-importance is like a whole podcast by itself.
It is self-importance, right? Now, here's the funny thing. They have that sense of self-importance because they haven't got enough feedback in the areas they need feedback in. Yeah. I believe.
Yeah.
Back in the day, if I wasn't good at something, people told me.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That leads to practice. That leads to becoming better. That leads to honing skills and sharpening the knife.
That doesn't mean you never give a compliment because I think you can be complimentary.
And I need to do better about that. But yes.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that we're all boiling this down to is that let's give them a highlight. So we talked communication.
Yes.
Is leads to healthy relationships. What was the next one?
Communication and consistency.
Consistency. And we respond to inconsistency with consistency.
Yeah.
Very good. Anything you'd like to add before we hit that button to turn us off?
No, just that you really sent us into a whole another podcast topic with self-importance like that.
Well, that'll be next.
And that which leads to like the, we'll be doing one on intellectualism soon.
Yeah.
And, it's like
in its place in the church.
Yeah. And the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. But oh my goodness. Well, you guys, we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Like we love reading your comments and a lot of you have been texting us in comments.
Yep.
And we love hearing those and we love to hear from you guys.
Yep.
Be sure to like and share our podcast on Instagram, on Facebook,
wherever you are,
Twitter. Yeah, wherever you are. Yeah. We love to hear from y'all. This is a blast for us.
Yes. Thank you guys so much for your feedback. And thank you so much for supporting. We're excited to be a part of everything that God is doing in today's church. And we hope that whatever we say and whatever we do is a blessing. If there's a topic that you would like to hear talked about, shoot it to us. Text the word think to 910-600-0498. That's text the word think, THINK, to 910-600-0498 and send us a question, and we'll do our best to answer that question on the podcast if it's appropriate, and if it's not appropriate via podcast, maybe through text message. But we're excited about what God is doing, and we're happy to be a part. And as always, you are watching Think on These Things on the Biblos Network.